You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Web Radio. And now time for the Classic Car Show with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber.
Good morning and welcome to the Classic Car Show on America's Web Radio. And we want to thank all the folks that tune in and listen to it, not only here in the United States, which we got a great audience here, and we love every one of you, or Jim does. Some of you I don't like, but others, Anyway, we are also #1 in the UK as a radio station goes. And people tune in not only live, but they download our podcast, which because we've got such a fantastic IT person now, Brett Allman is in charge of all of our, anything that has a button on it, he's in charge of. And I consider a computer has a button on it, a lot of them, and he's in charge of them, and he does a wonderful job of getting our shows posted, and this show will be posted Monday, Archive Monday, and you can pick it up on YouTube. And we ask that if you're listening and you're not a subscriber to America's Web Radio on YouTube, please sign up for it or follow us on Facebook. Either way, this show will be posted on Monday, and we are so flattered. And I guess I haven't had a compliment like this in I can't remember when, and for old man, this makes you feel really good. And I called our guest today, the other day, to ask him if he'd be on the air with us and do an interview with us today and bring us up to date on what he's doing. And I call Dr. Fred Simeone, and many of you know Fred, and I called him, and his person that answered said who it was calling, and I was so flattered, and I haven't talked to Fred in probably a year or so. And he said, "Oh yeah, David." And for someone like Dr. Fred Simeone to remember you, you feel like you've climbed the mountain.
Well, let me say this: we need to talk to him more often, and I'm probably at fault more than anybody. And I know our distinguished colleague or extinguished colleague Steve, who's out on a tour today, likes to chat with him too, but. We've got some exciting things to talk to him about. And the first thing I want to talk about is, you mentioned #1 in England. Well, Dr. Fred's #1 in the world with his museum.
That's bigger than us.
He has been given an award worldwide, and that's every collection you can think of. So, Fred, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Would you please tell us how this all happened and occurred and what it takes to be that?
Well, there's a Classic Car Trust, which is based in Liechtenstein, and they study collections in general, and they do it in a very scientific way. They looked at 200 collections around the world. They decided they would study 100, and they gave them grades and ranked them on the basis of the quality of the collection, the historical quality of the collection, and the social good that the collection did. And of those 100 collections, we got the highest score. So in a ceremony in Paris, I was told I was #1, and we're pretty happy about that.
Congratulations. That is wonderful. Now, you've talked about what it took to get the award, but there's one outside activity that you do that I am not aware of any other museum doing, and that's you share your cars outside with people. You actually have events where you bring them out, whether it's brass cars or race cars, and you share them. And can you kind of refresh our listeners as to how that happens, please?
Yes, we have in the back of the museum, we have a 3-acre, we call it a track, and I believe that a historic car needs a historical reference. Otherwise, it's eye candy. You have to know why it's important and why it's in the collection. We have 70 cars, and they've all been curated. There's nothing in there but really 2-passenger sports racing cars and a few other exceptions, a few NASCARs and things like that. So our audience loves to see the moving on our track, but we force them to listen to about 10 or 15 minutes about the technology of each car, and then we give them a historical talk, which is largely the stories of the cars. We have a nice women's audience, and they like to hear stories about crazy drivers and as well as technological improvements. And then we'll usually take 4 or 5 cars out, usually from our collection and occasional guest cars. You just drive them around, do figure eights. We did the 24 minutes of Le Mans and other things like that to let people know that they are historic, and they also not only look good, but they even sound good. So they get that experience as well as the history.
Do you record these sounds? Do you remember the old Riverside record sounds of Sebring and the Cuban?
Yeah, I do have those records, and we record them pretty much on request. I guess we could probably make an archive one day, which would require us to battery up and gas up all of them. They all run, by the way. All of our cars in the foundation run. But what we do is we will get a request. We'll certainly record them when we're demonstrating them, and then we file them, and then people will call in and say, I want to hear this or that. So we have a sound of maybe 10 or 15% of them.
Beautiful.
Fred, you are actually touching the people with the historic cars. Do you think there's I personally, and I get on my soapbox, and we get on our soapbox about the fact that, where would the United States be without cars and trucks? We'd still be paddling down the river. Do you think that the common person today, and I don't even know what that is, but just the individual that comes to your museum, do you think they have the appreciation of what the car has meant to our country?
No, I think aggregately, of course, remember, we have a kind of a filtered audience. It's largely car guys. But if you're talking about the public in general, I think they take it for granted. There's so much evidence of that. People are talking about cars that don't need a driver. When you look at the car of the future, it's usually not an interesting design or shape. It usually looks like it was designed by a computer. I gave a talk called the appliancization, which is a new word. Appliancization means turning something into an appliance of the automobile, and people are picking cars like they pick refrigerators. I do think that the era of style, and where we could go down the street and say, oh, that's a Pontiac. We don't do that much anymore. Cars generally look the same. So I don't think people are involved as cars as much. Then there's that thin layer of guys like you two and on some of our audience who are just car people. But the answer to the real question is, do they realize how important it was? Cars made highways, highways made shopping centers made cities. We would have a totally different life without cars. But I think that's now to the stage where it's been accepted. So I really don't think they have the historical perspective you're talking about.
Well, I assume you remember, and it wasn't that long ago, the remark from one of the Democrat candidates that the groceries just grow in the store and they pick them there.
Yeah,
that's why you go to. That's why it's a grocery store.
Yeah,
and they package.
Same kind of thing.
I guess they package the cereal someplace in the grocery store.
It's amazing. When do you see much youth? That's the other thing David and I and Steve talk about, is taking the children to museums to have them appreciate it and to understand more about the history of the automobile. But I know you run a summer program, and I want to talk about that too. But do you see during the year many youngsters coming in?
Well, it's like everything else. They are guys and girls who hit it off right away, and they're looking and that they're attentive. And there are others who just walk by and somehow don't feel that engagement is necessary. So it's very spotty. Mm-hmm. The thing that we're trying to do, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but the thing we're trying to do is to show that the racing car, which is what we have, sports racing car, is an example of how competition makes everything better. Because among the other problems I'm noticing with modern society is the young person, and I would have to say young man, doesn't understand that you got to get out there and compete to get ahead. It's very comfortable to stay home, stay on your computer, hang out with the guys, get $5 of McDonald's food, and live at home for a while. The sports racing car, is supposed to be an example of how you race to win, and when you win, you get better. We're trying that on our youngsters, and I must answer your question by saying, nowadays it's a hard sell.
Mm-hmm. Now, you just touched on another subject about sports racing cars. There's a new film coming out about Ford versus Ferrari, and I'm wondering what kind of audience that's going to attract, if it's just going to be old car guys like us, or that we're going to see some youth going to it.
I don't know. They're launching it at our place. They've designated us as the car museum partner for that movie, which doesn't mean much, except we're going to have the party here and have some VIP guests come to the showing. I don't know. I mean, you got star power. Matt Damon and Christian Bale will be an attraction.
Yeah.
I really can't answer that. There are people who go to any movie, and then there are car people who will probably see it 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say. Who knows?
Yeah, well, it's wonderful that they're launching it there. Well, let me run back a step. We talked about summer programs. You did some summer youth programs this year. Some, I believe they were workshops.
Yeah.
With the kids. Could you tell us how that went?
Yeah, they're really neat. We have Rick Adams, our director of education, and his assistant, we affectionately known as Diesel. She and he have this really nice program, and I'll give you the real quick curriculum. It'll take just a minute. On the first day, they learn how to what power is, and they use a bottle rocket because they power it themselves. And bottle rocket has all the ingredients of power, and they make a bottle on a set of wheels. Second day, they draw a car on the graph paper. The third day, they whittle it out of balsa wood. The fourth day, they put it on a tabletop wind tunnel, and they redesign it and sand it till it's more, well done. And then the fifth day, when their parents come, they mount it on the bottle, and then we test it for speed. And we have one of these things that measures speeds in fractions of a second.
Wow.
So they get the whole experience of making something go and learning physics that way. That's pretty popular, oversubscribed. And you know what's sad, guys? Listen to this. But I had a lady tell me her 15-year-old son was there, and she said, it's the first time I've ever seen him do anything with his hands.
That's wonderful.
I mean, you guys probably had shop when you went to school, right?
Yeah, but the nuns wouldn't let me take it. They said that I needed to go to college.
But you wouldn't have that opportunity now in most schools.
No. We're going to take a short break, and then I want to continue this conversation.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Sure.
Your auto love and investment demands the best, and for 45 years, Passport Transport has been meeting those demands. From manufacturers to the one-car collectors and all other facets of the auto industry and antique auto hobby. The first and the finest with unequaled service and peace of mind. Passport Transport, your auto transportation company. Contact PassportTransport.com with your need today. Passport Transport.
Hi, this is Steve Ronaldo, host of the Classic Car Show on America's Web Radio. Just talking to you about antique car insurance. I think that if you're looking for the best coverage for your classic car, consider J.C. Taylor Insurance. They've been my insurer for years in this hobby and have the top rating of all of the insurance companies in the hobby. When you get ready for insurance, call J.C. Taylor or visit jctaylor.com on the internet.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on the Classic Car Show on America's Web Radio with our very, very special guest, Dr. Fred Simeone. And it is always a pleasure. And Fred, if you don't mind, I'm going to take up on something that Jim said, and we may just turn this into the Simeone Museum Classic Car Show. Is that all right with you? And do you mind if I call you more?
We can use all the publicity we can get. We need it.
We're happy to give it to you, believe me, because the things you do, I don't think people realize, and this is going to go, as David said, across to the UK and to other countries, but a lot of people come to America and a lot of people go to Philadelphia to see historic things, but your car museum's like the Liberty Bell. It's probably the only one that does the things that
except his museum has no crack in it.
Right, that's right. So, but it's just, we got, this is Promote Fred Radio. Yeah.
We'll do that.
Well, first of all, the award blows me away.
Oh, and by the way, Fred, Ed Watts from Passport Transport said to say hello to you. So.
Good. Return it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank him.
Yeah, he's a good guy. All right, let's go back and talk about the children and the lady that said that her son had never done anything with his hands. When I was a kid growing up, and we're all probably in the same age area, bottle rockets, I mean, we did those all the time. And I don't think I hadn't heard of a bottle rocket probably in the last 60 years. So,
well, you know, I want to bring some, as you all were talking about that, and you brought up the word rockets. You know, I wish somebody would put together the correlation of, okay, what was the first thing one of the first things that landed on the moon so they could get around easily?
A rocket.
No, transport.
Transport?
Yeah, so they could drive around.
The car.
Yeah,
okay.
And, you know, and, oh my God, okay, so you're bringing that in from the NASA. Well, look at what NASA has done to the automobile.
Yeah.
And GPS. And I wish somebody would write a book or do something about and what do they use at Cape Canaveral or Cape Kennedy or whatever it's called these days, but they use a power to bring the rockets in and out, and it's basically a car of sorts or a truck of sorts, and they ship stuff to Cape Canaveral, the launch pad or whatever, to, you know, in trucks to get it. So I wish somebody would write a book about the correlation between transportation and other industries and what NASA has meant to cars and cars have meant to NASA, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, but it all evolves. It's like Fred's Museum, sports racing cars. I mean, that's something we enjoy.
And you know, people say, why does somebody want to race a car? What importance is it? My gosh, the technology that's come out of auto racing that's applied to our car today. Yeah. Am I wrong, Fred?
Well, no, I think, the idea that automotive development has helped and been helped by aerospace is interesting. But the counter argument to that is people say, well, that doesn't mean that you as an individual have to own it. It doesn't mean that your car has to be particularly good looking. And what the hell are you doing with a car that has 200 or 300 horsepower and burns a lot of energy? So, you know, there's a counter argument to that where you could acknowledge all the improvements that the automobile has been made, but still go back to this appliance, which is what the new cars are, where the new cars are heading.
Fred, that's beautiful.
Not only appliance, but I'm always fascinated at the fact of fighting competitive cars, and yet you can take one part from one car and put it in the other car.
The components today. Yeah, well, that's just, it's cost. Yeah. Fred, that 5-day program you do, how many times do you do that in the summer?
We do it. We managed to be able to get 5 in during the summer break.
Okay. And is there a tuition charge or anything for it?
Yeah, but it's nominal because we do give them lunch. Okay. And but there's no tuition charge for Rick or Diesel. and there's no charge for the thing. But we do have to cover 5 lunches for them, so it ends up being about $100.
Oh, that for 5 days and for what you do. I mean, I remember the Pinewood Derby cars we made as Cub Scouts, which I don't know if they do that anymore or not, but you put that in, you teach them about a bottle rocket propulsion and measuring speed. So there's a lot in that 5-day curriculum. Is there a notebook that goes with that they can go home and continue or pursue anything?
They do have printed notes, and they get daily notes about what the project is too. We probably could do better with a more scientific approach. We're in a way we're trying to get out of the school mode and be more into the fun mode. It's becoming very obvious that if you want kids to learn nowadays, there's got to be a certain amount of fun, a certain amount of excitement. Otherwise, they drift away.
Well, otherwise they're playing with their phones or their iPads and things like that, which is, I guess you can call modern technology too. You've got some other programs coming up. I think you're featuring Nuvolari, if I'm not mistaken, on your. I get your newsletter, and maybe you can kind of elaborate on some of the activities coming up, please.
Well, let me tell you how we do a program. It's a combination of practicality and a desire to transmit information. Of course, we like to make it more organized than it really is, but basically speaking, when you have 70 cars like we do, it's possible to create a theme that allows you to bring the car out in some kind of context. We did one for Bastille Day, July 14th, as you know, every year. And we had several cars that were actually driven by men who were involved in the American the French counteractions against Germany. You know, guys who were actually in that owned our Delahaye and our Peugeot and our Bugatti that won Le Mans and all that. So, So we talk about what was going on in France, and then about how these drivers, one of these, the guy who won Le Mans in our Bugatti was hung by the Germans, and Robert Benoist. And we tell those interesting stories. We get the women involved, and then we drive them around for another 15 or 20 minutes, and then we open the hoods and let them look inside. So they get, between the technical talk and our about 20-minute historical talk and then riding, they get like an hour and a half of an interesting experience. So that's basically what we're said about. And it can be something like Jaguar, and we'll have run our Jags, or Sebring, or Mille Miglia, an in theme that lets them know a facet of sports car racing.
That's incredible. You also have the Nuvolari event coming up, though, and can you kind of tell me about that? Because a lot of people, don't recognize who he is, and he's probably, he and Fangio and maybe a couple of others, the greatest racing drivers that ever existed.
Right, and we want to get their name out there before it's forgotten, because these guys were heroes of the time. They had a significant influence on society as well as on sports car racing and racing in general. They were heroes and they were inspiration. So we talk about their, in a case like this where we feature a driver, we always like to have the story about how he came up from nothing, about how he started on motorcycles, so that the young guys know that everybody has a shot to be a hero. And we give that story. We have a big screen that'll have contemporary pictures of him while we talk about his history, and then we'll take cars out that either he drove, which we only have one, or that were cars that were identical to the ones he drove. And then, we'll tell stories about how he would raced in the millimeter with the lights out at night so that nobody could not tell him that he was coming on, and his personal battles with Achille Varzi and, the stuff that makes it interesting and hopefully makes these people want to go online or to the library and read about.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about him is he had a turtle, I think, wasn't it, for a symbol, like Ferrari with the horse?
Yeah.
Do you remember how he acquired that, or did someone give him that?
I know that it was a gift. He used to wear it as a brooch. He put it right on the collar of his sweater. Okay. And he wore it that way. I don't want to make up the story because I'm a little too vague. I don't want to give you the secondhand story, but it is kind of just one little facet of his life. Right. In fact, I'm going to read up on that before we give the talk, in case there's something in there that the girls would like.
Yeah. There's a museum in Mantua, Italy, I think, for him. Right. Yeah, to honor him. And I notice now that there's been some recent articles on the fact that they've opened a Jimmy Clark Museum in Scotland to honor him. Mm-hmm. And I think you've got some cars of the era that Jimmy Clark raced.
Yeah, we have the Aston Martin DBR1 that he raced a couple of times in Le Mans. Mm-hmm.
And
60, 61, yeah.
Yeah, and he ran a D-type Jaguar, I think, for a Carrera Cross, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
One time. And you have a D-type, don't you?
We have a D-type too.
Okay. Other activities coming up. You've got let's talk about, we're going to take a break and we'll come back and I want to talk about your upcoming auction that you have at your museum too.
Okay.
Please. Okay.
Great.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email maga45cag@gmail.com.
Hi, my name is Steve Ronaldo, host of the Classic Car Show on America's Web Radio, talking to you about antique car insurance. In this hobby that I've been part of for years, not all insurance companies and insurance coverage is the same. I would suggest that you call J.C. Taylor or visit jctaylor.com to find out some information about some of the best antique car insurance you can get, such as agreed value insurance for your classic car. Again, when you get ready to insure your classic, antique, or even your street rod, call J.C. Taylor Insurance or visit jctaylor.com.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
Your auto love and investment demands the best, and for 45 years, Passport Transport has been meeting those demands. From manufacturers to the one-car collectors and all other facets of the auto industry and antique auto hobby. The first and the finest with unequaled service and peace of mind. Passport Transport, your auto transportation company. Contact PassportTransport.com with your need today. Passport Transport.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And we're back on the Classic Car Show, or I should say the Simeone Museum Classic Car Show. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Okay, we're back anyway on America's Web Radio, and I want to remind everybody that this show will be archived and posted on our website, americaswebradio.com, Monday, as well as, and Jim, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we're on every podcast player that we know about. Certainly all of the top, the Spotify's, the iTunes, and so forth and so on, and Google.
That's great.
And we're heard all over the world, and we're just delighted to say the results has been incredible. We started a new show yesterday, Thursday, called Let's Talk Venezuelan. And you and I were talking about the fake news before we came in the studio. And this show is done by Venezuelans that have gotten their citizenship legally, and but it's telling the truth about what's happening in Venezuela. And we have so many unique shows, the Doctor's Lounge, Detailing Addiction, so forth and so on. A lot of medical shows, a lot of just interesting shows like the Classic Car Show that, like I said, I find it interesting. We're number one in the UK. So with that being said, I don't want to take up any more time, but we are heard every place, whatever your favorite podcast player is. If we're not on it, please let us know, or subscribe to YouTube, or follow us on Facebook. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're back with Dr. Fred Simeone of Simeone Auto Museum in Philadelphia. And you've got an auction coming up, and I believe it's Bonhams, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Fred?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And you usually every year do it around the time of Hershey, I think just before Hershey.
Right. Just when the crowd's coming into our area, we're about 40 miles from Hershey. So we hope that people will come a day early and look at what we have.
Oh, that'd be great. Well, Philadelphia Airport, because that's where most of your international travelers are going to come in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and we're about 10 minutes away from that.
What is being featured this year? Because a lot of times you're featuring cars that have never been restored.
Yeah, so that's the principle of this auction was started on this basis. We wrote a book about the stewardship of automobiles and about preservation and how restoration can be a bad thing and finding a good original car can be a blessing. But there was no venue for that. The typical auction is usually looking for the car that you can take to a show or the high restoration car, and you'll even see in the reports restored to perfection, all of that. We wanted to have a place where somebody would not be ashamed to come and either sell or buy a good unrestored car. The advantage being the Bonhams is our car guy people. They're not like some of the other auction houses, which will not touch your car unless it's above a certain value. Bonhams caters to car people. So we have automobilia and we have good unrestored cars. And they're welcome there. And it's more of an auction for guys with grease under their fingernails rather than guys who want to take a car to a big show. And there's a lot of enthusiasm, and of course it's exciting for us because some of the most unusual stuff turns up out of barns. And because we now have a lot of automobilia, parts, books, it's a fun place to be.
Wow. So anything significant in the way of automobilia that comes to mind? Any collections being sold?
Well, yeah, we had some collections that were really very interesting. We have a collection now that is fascinating because it's a gentleman's entire library, and it came on a pallet with about, I would guess, just looking at the cube on the pallet is about 5 by 5. There's at least 25 boxes, if not more, of books from his collection that you can buy individually. Although I think I don't think they're going to try to auction it in total. So you can get the results of somebody's lifetime of collecting in one shot if you bid for it. I found parts from rare and interesting cars, some interesting automobilia like trophies and hood ornaments that are special. There's always great things that turn up just because people have decided this is the place they want to sell it.
That's incredible. And there are a lot of automobilia collectors, and I'm not talking gas pumps, but when you mention hood ornaments and things, there's guys that do that, and there's guys that collect emblems. And there was a museum in South Bend that they collected Duesenbergs and emblems for a long time, and he's gone now, and it's all been doled out in other areas, but we're all that way. I've got some. I'm sure you've got some at home of things you just don't want to get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that comes to mind is an old pre-war KLG spark plug out of probably a Bugatti at one time or another. To further talk about the museum, you've got 70 cars, and I'm wondering, have you added anything, or are you doing anything?
As I mentioned earlier, it's really tough to add. I don't want to put cars in there just because it's time to have another car. In other words, I don't want to put cars that did not have a significance in sports racing history. Mm-hmm. So every car that's in the collection, well, most of them are in dioramas, and most of them actually raced in the dioramas.
Wow.
In other words, so we have a Le Mans diorama, and all 11 cars actually were in Le Mans. Mm-hmm. Sebring, the same way. We have a couple of cars that were at Sebring. Millimidia, the same. So if we start just getting cars that are, believe it or not, guys, we actually have turned down cars that wanted to be donated to us because we didn't think it was fair to the donor to accept them and not be able to display them. But we don't want to have the theme and the chronology messed up by cars that really we can't tell a story about, a winning story about.
Right. Well, and that's what makes your museum so special, because you do have these areas. But a couple of years ago, you had, was it a Renault Grand Prix car from like 1914 or something that was
1906, yeah.
1906.
One of the Grand Prix Renaults. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's probably the only one surviving.
No, there are. It's kind of a long story, but there were. They made a special run of 10 just for the American market, and 4 of them are known to survive.
Okay. And you take that car out and run it, don't you?
Oh yeah, we crank it up and run it. It runs great.
That's fabulous. Now, when you would take that one out, do you have other Grand Prix or racing cars from that period?
We could take that out, like when we did Bastille Day.
Sure.
We took about the French influence on design. We had something like what it was like to, racing. Think about this: racing before World War I this is road racing, was as robust as it was in Europe and France, Italy, England. The Fairmount Park race in Philadelphia attracted 300,000 people.
Right.
After World War I, that all stopped in the United States. While in Italy, there was the Millimidia and the Targa Florio. In France, there was Le Mans and Lyon and Reims and many others. And, of course, in England, they have road racing every weekend at all these tracks. There was literally nothing except one small club, the Automobile Racing Club of America, which raced around in the woods, more or less. So it's an amazing story about why road racing died. And it didn't come back until the GIs came home and started Watkins Glen in 48.
Yes.
But we repeat that story about those other races by having cars that actually raced in them. And then each track has a great story. Each track has wonderful story. And then the other beauty about sports racing cars is you have driver stories, you have international competition stories, venue stories about the track, and then the technological and even artistic development of the cars. So we throw all that in when we talk about them.
Fred, we haven't asked you this, but I would like to. Your website, where you're exactly located, tickets to get into the museum. Tell us some of the mechanics, if you don't mind.
Well, our website is www.Simeone Museum, S-I-M as in Mary, E-O-N as in Nancy, SimeoneMuseum.org. You do not need to have tickets in advance. Parking is free. It's $10 for most people. Students is $8. Kids is free. And you just kind of show up. It's best to go online. If you really want to get granular about what's in the cars, there's an app that you can use. You can get it on your smartphone, and that will take for about 3, 4, 5 minutes on each car. Otherwise, the plaques are deliberately short, large print, short, 8 or 10 lines that are by each car. And also, we have a carry-around little iPad that you can use, and as you go by a car, you can access that. So that's what I would do. If you really want to see them moving, come on a demonstration day. If you want to just contemplate or draw them or take pictures, you can come during the week. Sadly, our attendance is pretty low, and you can kind of do what you want. And then, that's all a kind of custom design to make it comfortable. You can bring your dog if you want.
You're dog friendly.
Not real fancy.
That's great. To find a place that's dog friendly anymore is well, it's good. I think that's wonderful.
Do you have a shop there as well, or?
Yeah, we have a shop there, and we have a genius who runs it. Who's the guy Kevin Kelly started working on old cars in his 20s. He's equally comfortable around that Renault. In fact, this week he was working on both of them. He's equally comfortable around that 1906 Renault as he is around our horizontally opposed air-cooled 917 Porsche. He's worked on all of them. He's just an inherent genius, and I don't think I could do without him. The other thing we might want to get to at some point is the library, and that's a little bit less of the kind of library you can walk in and take out books, because so much of it is documentation. But we do answer emails regularly, help authors mainly with their books, and restorers with their individual cars.
The book that you wrote, is it still available?
I'm afraid it's sold out. I didn't predict that it would be so good, that I'm afraid it's sold out. But you can get one on Amazon.
Okay. I have one, by the way, that I got from you, and it's incredible. And I think anybody that's a collector if they haven't read it, they need to read it.
Now, there are two books. There's the one I think you're talking about is The Stewardship of Historically Important Cars.
Right.
Yeah. Then there's also a book which is still available. It's 385 pages about the collection with illustrations, historical talks, and it has the collection. And we put it together because so many people asked us, about the cars in general, but particularly how did you get it? How did you find it? How did you know to get it in the 1960s? And that's commonly asked question. So we put that all together. It's a big fat coffee table type book, which is available through our website.
Fred, we're going to have to take our last break, and we'll come back on the Classic Car Show with Dr. Fred Simeone and the Classic Car Show, brought to you by the Simeone Museum. We'll be back right after this.
45 years of experience is behind.
Fred, what do you think?
Of the show?
Yeah. Have we missed anything?
I love it.
Well, we love having you.
I mean, we're getting a chance to get the word out there, and I hope some people will listen to this and want to show up. It's that's what it's all about. When you're giving these cars away to society, the only real pleasure you get out of it is if they come and look at them and learn something, or at least get thrilled by them. So that's all. That's really my life, is getting people to understand this stuff.
Yeah. I want to talk about the fact you've donated it to a charitable foundation so that it will continue on. And I'll let you kind of introduce that if you would like.
Okay.
And maybe I'll ask, what's going to happen to the collection someday. And because do you remember V.F. Mashek's collection?
Yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
I worked for him one summer. And
really? Oh, he had Voida had wonderful stuff.
Oh, he did. And he, unfortunately, his life was too short. And
okay, excuse me, we're coming back.
I will be, okay.
listening.
And we're back on the Classic Car Show, the Simeone Museum Classic Car Show today. And we're going to invite, I'm going to go out of my way and invite those that are listening both to live, listening to us right now, and those that are going to be listening to us from all over the world on the archive that'll be posted this Monday, and you'll be able to pick it up on our website as well as on all the podcast players and YouTube and so forth and so on. In fact, YouTube, or Facebook, I should say, is up right now. As soon as we end the show, you can go back and watch Weber scratch his bald head and or do whatever, and it will be up on Facebook immediately. So we want to thank our special guest, Dr. Fred Simeone, and we're going to be talking to Fred a bunch more in the future days ahead. So anyway, we'll get back to the show, and Mr. Weber.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I want to tell our listeners about, Fred mentioned an app on the smartphone about each of the cars. Can you elaborate on that, or how they get that app on their smartphone, please, Fred?
Yeah, well, it's a standard. It's an ordinary app, so you just go to your app site, and you can access Simeone Museum. Okay. And then what it does basically is it talks about the car in more detail than people who would be visitors to the museum would want to read. You know, if you've been to museums with long explanations of their object, whether it's art or a statue, very often people don't have the time or the desire at that point to read it. But here, if you're a real car guy or you see a car that you're particularly interested in, you can click on the app. There'll be some historic pictures of the car, and then you'll hear me talking about what it was and what its significance is and why it made it into the collection.
That's great. And anybody anywhere in the world can get that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Just go to your app store.
Yeah. Do you have docents or volunteers that also lead tours?
We could not survive without volunteers.
Good.
We have about 80 or 90 volunteers on our list, and we have probably a third of them are pretty active in terms of coming regularly. Some of them have particular assignments. We have Shiny Bob, whose job is to make sure that every car is dust-free.
Okay.
And others who work in the shop. We have a guy who's our brake man, another guy who likes to work on chassis. Yeah, we have wonderful volunteers.
That's great. And I mean, is this going to go on? What's going to happen to the museum if something happens?
Well, one of the things behind the museum, as the collection was carefully curated throughout the years when a normal person could afford them. What happened is it suddenly built up to the point where I had them all in one big parking garage, and people said, you know, this collection will never be repeated. And then they said, you know, you ought to have the whole world looking at this. And I heard that time and time again. So, you know, I have to agree without being a wise guy. I don't think with a blank check you could repeat the collection or tell the story that we're trying to tell, which is the evolution of the greatest sports cars. So that being said, it would be a shame for this collection that when I pass to be sold off, like so many of them are. Virtually all the collections that are out there are still privately owned. And, you know, estate taxes in the United States are such that when you get to this level, you may be up to 30, 40 or more percent of estate taxes. So you have to sell up to half of your collection to keep the other half.
Yes.
The only way to do this, if you have a wonderful daughter who says, Dad, I don't want a big inheritance. I don't want the value of these cars. I'm out making my own living and I'm happy doing it. You say, well, then I think the best thing to do is to create a charity. It will not be taxed, and it gives the collection an opportunity to stay together indefinitely.
That's great. So you've basically taken care of the collection forever, which is wonderful. And with the cars that you have in there, they do need to be preserved in the state they're in now. And I don't think you have any that are over restored, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that we've gotten some that were pretty heavily done, but we can't de-restore them. But most of them have been carefully restored. That's part of the criteria. Every car in the collection has its original body and chassis, and virtually all of them, except a few, have the original engine they were born with. And you said something forever. The only problem is, in order to do this, you need to build an endowment. In other words, regardless of how poor our income is, with all the charitable things we do and the low emission, you got to have an endowment that will live on its, that the museum can live on its interest. So that's the biggest challenge. It's very expensive to give things away if you want them to be perpetual. And the economic climate is not such that people want to donate to a car collection. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It doesn't. Yes. It's not the same as children's cancer or other things. So we have to kind of generate our own. If we are lucky to get some charity, it's wonderful. But we have to generate our own endowment.
Okay.
Fred, under the big portrait that they're going to have in the museum of Dr. Fred Simeone, I was wondering if America's Web Radio could write a little note under it, like you have with your cars. It would make it brief, but we'd like to describe the relationship of and who and what Fred Simeone meant to the car industry as well as to America's Web Radio.
Okay, well, such a portrait does not exist.
Okay.
and if you want it to be a memorial portrait, I hope it's a long time before you get a chance to do that.
I hope so too.
Well, I would settle for a few words under a Polaroid if people remember what a Polaroid is.
Yes.
Well, first of all, your insight is incredible, and
Amen.
Yeah, there weren't too many gentlemen. I mentioned one earlier in our break that come to mind that had the insight to do what you've done, and it's just to get it promoted. That's the big thing. I want to go back for a minute and talk about your 917. The significance of that, if I remember, is did it not win Le Mans?
No, it came in second in 1970.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's a very early car. It's one of the first 25 chassis.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, it's actually chassis number 43. It's
okay.
It's a car that's got a interesting history, and it's very hard to actually trace it. We believe that it's the chassis of the car that came in second in 1970 and raced in 71, but the body is the same. It's an identical body, a 1970 body made by Porsche, but probably not the body that was on the car when it raced. And that's one of the few cars that we have where the body is not the one that was born with. But the chassis is good enough, and they only made 5 long tails. That certainly has a place in our story.
Yes, but that's typical of race cars, and it's very difficult to find one that's because you may have been at a race, one car blew its engine, they took the engine from another car and left that car parked, and they were mix and match all day long, and nobody really took the time to track that back then.
No, we do it later on in the sense that we go out of our way to get good histories on these cars, and we've even actually found the original engine and put it back in a couple of our cars.
Oh, wow.
So that's hard to do, but that is important because it's like everything else, there now is the time and that you can actually do things like that. Another generation or so, you're going to end up with parts that are not from the car, and then sadly, if you misuse the cars, you'll end up replacing them when they break. So we make sure, and this doesn't make us popular with the guys who like to race vintage cars all out. but it does preserve the cars, and that is we drive all of them. They all run, but we don't take them to the track and pretend we know how to be racers and over-rev them and do stuff like that. I don't think every car has to be raced until it falls apart. I think it's at a certain point in time, if it's historic, you should use it. Like I often say, if a soldier fights in the war, a veteran marches in VFW parades.
Yeah, I'm with you there, because some vintage racing lately has gotten what I consider out of hand.
Yeah,
and
I've seen some wonderful cars messed up, and then they end up with replacement parts.
Yeah, well, but I guess if the guys can afford to do it, they do it. So
shame on them.
I'm with you. As we close, what else would you like to tell us, or what have we missed that we want to talk about? You've got the auction coming up. When is the Ford versus Ferrari movie event?
I believe I'm going to be close with this, but maybe not exact. But November 9th comes to mind.
Okay.
And that's when it's going to be. It's going to hit the movie theaters. And the producer hasn't given us the exact date of our showing, but it will probably be a week or two before that.
Excellent. And it'll be on your website, which is...
It'll be on our website. Mm-hmm.
www.simeonemuseum.org.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just future, next summer, you have the youth program again?
Yeah, now we have two other programs. We have just made an affiliation with something called the Urban Youth Racing League, and I would encourage you to go online and look at them. It's an interesting program. It's largely for inner city kids, poor kids, and in order to get driving lessons, in order to come to the museum, in order to have time on a simulator, you have to get C+ or better grades, or you can't stay in the program. And then when you get enough points because of good attendance and high grades, you get free time on a GART course. So
Wow.
It's very popular for kids, and we're going to extend. It's oversubscribed. We're going to extend that as their museum partner.
Okay.
So that's coming up, and then we've also developing a relationship with the charter schools in Philadelphia to have a regular kind of field trip educational program where they come here regularly to supplement their knowledge with something interesting.
Excellent. Do you have a simulator there at the museum?
No, we don't. We're waiting for the development to come, and quite frankly, we're waiting for donations.
Okay.
of simulators. There, we know where there's some out there, and we're trying to embarrass the company that owns them to get them. We've been working on that for about a year, and we may be closer than usual.
Okay.
But the good ones are. Remember, we have a really very tight budget with such low income.
Yeah.
We only have 5 full-time employees, and simulator is a whole salary.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Fred, before we leave, I want to thank you one more time for coming on, and you'll be hearing from me very shortly, probably early next week, and I'd like to talk to you about promoting the museum even more here.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Fred.
oh, great. Hey, guys, thanks a lot. Thanks for giving us this kind of exposure. We really love it.
It's always great to talk to you.
Okay.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the America's...
Fred, you still there?
Fred?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. What else can we do for you?
Well, I think just letting people know that what we have, I think the fact that we got this award should waken somebody up to say, hey, maybe it's worth going to see it. Philadelphia is in the center of a large demographic.
Yes.
If you include Manhattan to D.C., I don't think there's any place that has a higher concentration of population per square foot. Get these people to take a little ride into Philly and come and see it. That's really all we want. It's for people to enjoy it, really.
Good. That's key, and we're going to try and have you on maybe 2-3 times a year.
Hello?
Are you there?
Yeah, hello. You're getting real faint. Hello?
All right. Am I on now?
Yeah, now you're better.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like to talk to you more than once a year, and it seems to be like the only time we have is around Hershey, but maybe in the winter and maybe after the Ford versus Ferrari event we can talk. Sure. I'll go on the website. I didn't know you had the book on the collection, but I do want to get that so I can intelligently talk to you about some of those cars.
Yeah, it's pretty detailed.
Yeah. And David, have you got anything more? It's been great, Fred.
As always.
Well, I liked it as well. It was got a chance for me to gab. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, it wasn't enough.
Okay.
Oh, Fred, like I said, I was so flattered that you remembered who I was. That's just.
Oh yeah, I remember our last interview very well.
Good.
Well, we're going to do many more, and if you don't mind me calling you sometime during the week, we'll talk about how we can promote the museum more.
Okay.
Always glad to hear from you. Always.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Fred. Take care.
Take it easy, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.